Hi there, I'm Dustin Warnke. Welcome to this Tech Tip segment where today we're going to talk about how to skin and quarter a deer. Behind me is a nice 8-point that I shot this season, and I'm going to showcase a couple of products and a couple of tricks of the trade that I've learned over the years around a lot of other veteran hunters who have skinned a lot more deer than I have. But I have skinned quite a few deer in my lifetime, and I'm happy to say that I've got a really nice one behind here that I'm working on. So first thing what I did is I put everything on a gamble winch behind me. You can find one of these at Academy pretty easily. They're just basically a gamble, which is about that long, goes in between the legs, and then it has a little winch system to pull it up, and you can hang it from any tree. I was wondering what a good use would be for these Arizona ash trees that I planted about, 6 or 7 years ago, and finally they're strong enough to hold a deer. They're not good for much else besides maybe some shade. So, that's what I use to hang my deer is this tree and this gamble winch that I bought at my sporting goods store, and it's not a very expensive, not a very complicated piece of machinery. You just simply use it to pull your deer up and hang it overnight. Now, the rule always on hanging deer is to make sure you only hang deer when it is jacket weather. So if it's cold enough to wear a jacket, it's cold enough to hang a deer. That's the old unscientific way of looking at it. Definitely you want to watch the weather, you want to watch the temperatures and make sure they're not getting up in these 50s, 60s, 70s. Right now we're in the 30s. This is prime deer hanging weather, the 30s and 40s, and so on and so forth. Refrigerator temperature is always safe for hanging deer. So keep that in mind when you're going to hang a deer over a course of a couple of days, or if you're going to just hang him overnight. Keep that in mind. If it's too hot to wear a jacket, it's too hot to hang a deer. Okay, we're going to get into our next section here of actually quartering the deer. We had to skin them first, and I want to talk about some primal cuts to make. And the first thing we're going to do is use some power tools. I'm excited about this. So one of the tools we're going to be using is a reciprocating saw, and this is if you've done any kind of work around carpentry or any kind of cutting of any kind of metal or wood, you know what a reciprocating saw is. You can find these for about $50. It makes the job go a lot quicker, and the way that I do it requires a reciprocating saw. You can always use a pair of limb choppers, loppers as they're called a lot of times, and what we're going to do is just cut off the leg below the shoulder, what we're not going to be using for meat, and then at the end we're going to be cutting the leg above the haunches where we're not going to be using them for meat when we put everything in the cooler. So here we go. And a good trick to use when you're doing this is to simply take a knife and go around the skin on each of these extremities that we're going to be cutting off. We're just going to simply take our knife, go around them. That's going to make the saw blade or lopper or whatever you're using easier to utilize there. So here we go with leg number 2. We're cutting right below the shoulder area. This is just not a piece of the leg we're going to use, so that's why we're doing that. Okay, our next step is going to be to go on the inside of each extremity, each limb. We're going to go in the inside of the shoulders, on the inside of the back quarters, and I'll teach you another little trick in just a second. You can use just about any knife to do this next trick. What we're trying to do is cut, as I was mentioning before, the insides of the skin going to the middle of the deer. And what we're going to do there is one of the old tricks that my dad taught me years ago, and his dad taught him, is to skin everything back, put a tennis ball or some kind of bunch up some of that skin and put some kind of holder on there, a rock, a tennis ball, something like that. And with everything cut loose from the middle, you can simply tie it to a truck, a four-wheeler, any kind of moving vehicle, and pull that skin away from that deer. Now that's kind of the redneck backwoods way of doing it. I'm going to do it all by hand this day, but that's definitely a good idea. But one thing you have to make sure you do is you skin everything back, and I'll show you how to do that next. And you can use a gut hook certainly to do some of this. What we're doing is just getting up underneath that skin and going to where we hung our deer on the gambrel. And another thing to keep in mind that I did on this buck, and it's especially important on bucks, is tarsal glands. They're going to be up here in this region right here on each side. Tarsal glands are not good for your meat, and tarsal glands can get in the way of a lot of what you're trying to do. So that's where a deer will pee on his hocks. That's what the tarsal glands are, as a sign of dominance and so on and so forth. It's a good thing to cut off and hang for future deer hunts to show another deer's in the territory and to kind of get that whole mix going on with the deer hunting, but definitely something you want to cut off, and that's something I cut off before I hung my deer last night. So what I'm doing now on this first limb is I've cut down this way, and what I'm doing is just simply cutting away the skin and separating the skin from the meat. Now, something I could have done to start off with is to start cutting around here but I'm just starting off. You just want to cut around and make sure you free the skin from your lower extremities on the shoulder, and we just did that on the shoulder, but we're also doing that on the upper limbs as well. Okay, I switched knives now. What I'm using here is an Extrema Ratio knife from varmintlights.com. These are incredibly awesome knives. It's hard to I'm kind of speechless here. There's a carver knife and there's a skinner knife, and I believe the one that I'm using right now is the skinner knife. This has a gut hook on one side, and it has a really beautiful bladed edge on the other side. And I'm just using it, and this thing is so sharp. I'm just going, you want to make sure you start with a sharp knife and you end with a sharp knife, and you sharpen your knife throughout if you need to sharpen your knife, because if you don't sharpen your knife well, it's going to not be good. It's just going to make the job tougher. Now, when you're talking about deer, one of the things that you can get away with deer is there's a natural separation with the skin where you can just tuck in your fingers or punch and separate that skin from the deer. You don't have to work too hard at it. That's why I was saying earlier, you can skin it with a truck, you could skin it with a tennis ball, and you know, I've seen plenty of videos on how to do that. But you know, as long as you find that natural separation, and you're gonna need a knife, other than that, if you can't find that natural separation, what you're trying to do is separate as much meat from the skin as possible. If you wanna use that hide to do something else later, if you wanna use that hide to make you know, a backpack or a rug or something like that, you want to get as much meat or flesh it out as much as possible. But skinning an animal is not really hard. You're just simply trying to separate the meat from the skin and going through that, and we're going to speed up this process here as I do this, but I just wanted to give you the basics of how I start up here from a gambrel and work my way down the inside spread of the deer. I'm going to do the same thing with the shoulders when I get down here, and all of it comes off from the back. I'm working my way back to take that deer skin off, and we'll speed this up. I'd like to take this time to apologize for my noisy neighbor's dogs in the backyard. They're barking like all the time. And we just got a new dog next door, so anyway. The Extrema Ratio knife is doing an incredible job. You don't need the highest end knife to do this, but it sure does help to have something like the Extrema Ratio. This is from varmintlights.com. Where I got this. They have a wide selection of other knives that you can get and accessories for your hunting gear. This is just a beautiful, beautiful knife. What we can do now is just start pulling down on our hide, punching in between the meat and the skin, and that's what I'm going to work on doing next. And then we're going to skin out our shoulders and we'll be done skinning. If we get down around here, we're just going to go up underneath. We're almost there. So now that we are done with getting the skin all the way down to the head, what you can choose to do is take the head off with a pair of loppers, or cut the skin off, or cut the head off with a recip saw. That's probably what I'm going to do. But just to move along here, I'm going to show you what I do next for cutting off the shoulders and working our way up on getting the back strap out and quartering the deer. We'll worry about the skin later. The shoulders are connected, and this works the same on deer and hogs both, with sinew that just separates it. And what you're trying to do is just work on separating that and not be afraid to get your hands dirty. There's no bone connecting the shoulder, it's just a shoulder blade that literally connects with tissue. And it's coming free. Hallelujah. Put that in our trusty icebox cooler here. We'll do the same to the other one next. Big old shoulders. All right, next thing we work on back here is getting to the back straps. What we're gonna do is make linear cuts down the back straps to carve them out. The next step is to get your tenderloins out, and then the step beyond that, take a reciprocating saw, and if you want to save any of this meat, we're gonna cut it here and keep that carcass to trim off the meat. And then we're going to cut down here in the middle of the two hindquarters to separate them and put them in the cooler next. Now that we carved the back straps and the tenderloins out, now all we have to do, and what I like to do on big deer like this, because there's a lot of meat on the ribs, I don't really keep the ribs that often. I typically will trim all this out for burger meat or sausage meat. And what I'm going to do is cut here, as I was mentioning before. I'm going to keep all this area here to carve out later and trim out when I'm processing. And then I'm going to cut here, which is going to separate my two hindquarters. Cut here, and I'm done. Very, very easy and quick way to do it. I learned this from the folks over at DB Hunting Ranch. That's the way they taught me how to do it. Everybody kind of has their own way. My dad's family hangs their deer from the head up and skins down. And in a way that makes sense, but this has always worked the best for me. So your mileage may vary, but this is my way. So I'm gonna get out the recip saw and get to cracking here. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I do it. All I gotta do now is cut here and get rid of this part. Those are hanging nicely on the gambrel, so I can do that after I address the rest of the carcass. So I'm gonna wait to do that off camera. But thanks again for watching us today. Check out varmintlights.com for the extreme ratio carver knife and skinner knife. And check out dustinsprojects.com for some of my other videos. Thank you so much for watching.